I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about the third of Charles Sanders Peirce's Monist paper, The Law of Mind. The Law of Mind was published in July 1892. The first two papers focused on the role of chance in evolutionary cosmology, which he called tychism, where Tyche is the Greek goddess of fortune and hence chance. In this paper, he turns to another important component of his metaphysics, continuity, which he calls synechism, also based on the Greek syneches, which means continuous. Together, tychism and synechism are two cornerstones of his cosmology, or how the universe came to be the way it is, essentially through a process metaphysics. He writes, tychism, or chance, must give birth to an evolutionary cosmology, in which all the regularities of nature and of mind are regarded as products of growth, or synechism, that is, continuity, and to a Schelling-fashioned idealism which holds matter to be mere specialized and partially deadened mind. On the latter, he will elaborate in this paper. With chance established, he proposes the general law of mental action. This law of mind is: ideas tend to spread continuously and to affect certain others which stand to them in the peculiar relation of affectability. In this spreading, they lose intensity and especially the power of affecting others, but gain generality and become welded with other ideas. He will unpack each point, but just to restate it more simply, he posits that an idea once obtained does not remain isolated but affects other ideas that are somewhat related. While this idea may weaken as it connects to other ideas, they also become together generalized. What is an idea? In its simplest form, an idea is an event in an individual consciousness, an intellectual event. But if it is merely an event, isolated in itself, it means that once the event is over, the idea is also gone forever, with any subsequent idea, even one resembling the previous idea, an entirely new one. Yet that is not our experience of thinking. Our ideas seem to continue into newer ideas, which then leads us to ask, how can a past idea be present? In order for a past idea to be present, it cannot be wholly past. It can only be going. Here I think Henri Bergson's explanation of the now is helpful, more so than Peirce's. We may think of the present as this particular instant of the now. For instance, we may see a flash of light with our eyes, but even before we can cognize that we saw such a flash, remembering that light is the fastest moving thing, it is already over. Yet we cognize that we saw a flash of light. Bergson explains it by memory, which Peirce does not mention. What we cognize may be of this very instant, but it is based on our memory of what happened a brief instant ago. And from the combination of the sensory visual perception of the flash captured by our memory of it, just as pure sensory data, and then our cognitive apparatus cognizing this data, we have an idea of the flash of light. What may make Peirce's paper a little obtuse is that he is trying to explain continuity without assuming that we understand it, without invoking concepts of continuity such as flow, since that would be begging the question. So he has to explain a process concept, a flow concept, using discrete concepts, which is why he writes, the present is connected with the past by a series of real infinitesimal steps. This infinitesimally spread out consciousness of something is a direct feeling of its contents as spread out, he adds. He has to break down what is really a flow into a series of closely connected steps. What is the infinitesimal? This term comes from calculus, where for instance, to find the area under a curve, we split this area into a series of rectangular strips and sum the area of these rectangles. However, some of these rectangles exceed the area of the curve they are representing, and some are less. To improve this approximation, we make the width of the strips narrower and narrower, which cause this error to be less and less. If we make their widths infinitely small, we would then get the true area under the curve. That is what infinitesimal means. Peirce asks us to consider two infinitesimal time intervals overlapping each other, each with a beginning, middle, and end. The beginning of the second moment of these is the middle of the first, and by the time we get to the middle of the second, it is the end of the first moment. Then consider many of these infinitesimal time intervals one after the other. Because of their continual overlaps, the last of these moments will contain the entire series. He thinks this is how our cognition works. We experience an event as immediate even though it is in actuality not instantaneous but takes some moments. However, because an infinitesimal duration is an infinitely small one, the sum of two infinitesimal intervals is itself infinitesimal, so that it is immediately perceived. What applies to a finite series may not apply to an infinite one. Peirce discusses two types of infinity, the endless and the innumerable, or how I prefer to think about it, discrete and continuous. The endless is like the series of real integers, infinite but numerable or countable, that is discrete, while the innumerable is like the number of points on a line where in between two such points, no matter how near to each other, there will always be points between them, making them infinite and uncountable and hence continuous. A continuum must include not only the points in between, but also its limits or its start and end points. What happens at these limits? Peirce asks us to consider a surface painted half blue and half red. What is the color at the boundary between the two colors? Half blue and half red. Translating this analogy to our conscious experience of time, what is the present moment like? It is half past and half to come. The law of mind differs from physical forces, as a force can be in one direction and then its opposite. While the flow of time in our minds has a directionality from past to future and not the other way around. The present is affectable by the past but not by the future, he writes. In a similar way, because a future moment will become a present moment later on and a present moment becomes the past, the future is affectable by the present. That means that if two states are not affectable by the other, they must be contemporaneous or at the same time. For a state in between two states, it affects one and is affected by the other. If there are three states, let's say in the order of A, B, and C, A being the earliest and C the latest, B is affected by A and C is affected by B. This means C is also affected by A, but to a lesser extent. Peirce calls this extent insistency. In that way, the current state is a function of previous states. Time, as the universal form of change, cannot exist unless there is something to undergo change, he observes. If feelings are not discrete but continuous, it means that when we experience a particular feeling, it is not just an instantaneous spike, but it's more a continuum attenuating from the instantaneous peak the further away in time we go, a gradual diminution. Peirce explains how a feeling will work on a cellular level or in a microorganism. When excited at one point of the cell's surface, the feeling spreads, but not in a wave motion where it departs the original point of excitation completely. The way I envision this is how a bedsheet will behave when you throw it over the mattress. The air below the sheet spreads to the other end, while the end that you're holding onto still retains a certain height, only diminishing when you lower it slowly to tuck it into the mattress. The rate at which a feeling spreads is faster than the rate at which it dies out. Feelings have a spatial extension, and our attention wanders about among our feelings, giving some our attention while not paying any attention to others. Parts of the mind, infinitesimally close to one another, get affected, which allows the spread, the communication of the feeling. According to Peirce, ideas have three elements. 1. A quality as a feeling. 2. An energy to affect other ideas. And 3. A tendency to bring other ideas along with it. As an idea spreads, its power attenuates, decreasing though its quality or its essence remains little changed. However, as it spreads, it brings along more and more ideas along with it. These become wedded together to form a general idea. By continuous spreading, an idea becomes generalized, he adds. My example. For first idea, you thought of playing football. The second idea is when you realize you need a group of people to play it with and you are alone. The third, fourth, and fifth idea is other ball games like tennis, baseball, basketball, etc. The sixth idea is other games such as board games and computer games. And your seventh idea is to play Tetris on your computer. The initial idea of a football still remains clear as a white ball with black spots made of leather even as the other ideas arise. As this initial idea of playing football spreads, more and more ideas come, which becomes wedded as the idea that you merely want to play a game, any game. Such a general idea is a living feeling. It is a continuum with many parts and can be felt immediately. Because it is unbounded, it has a possibility for more ideas. A general idea can change, modifying as it is affected and is affecting other ideas. Later, even when our consciousness does not direct its attention towards it, it already has been formed and is a habit which is there but latent. It is activated when something associated with it arises, a suggestion which has a relation to the general idea or habit and which thus triggers the habit. The future is suggested by, or rather is influenced by the suggestion of the past, he adds. Thus, continuity is needed for ideas to connect with one another. The three main modes of logical inference are deduction, induction, and hypothesis. According to Peirce, these correspond to the three chief modes of action of the human soul. Deduction corresponds to reflex or habitual reaction, where a sensation is associated with a particular reaction under the dominion of a habit. Induction corresponds to the formation of habit through repetitive association between the general idea and a reaction. Habit is that specialization of the law of mind whereby a general idea gains the power of exciting reactions, he writes. Hypothesis corresponds to how from sensing certain qualities, an idea is inferred. For instance, the inference made from seeing a person wearing an expensive watch is that she is rich, or that a person in yellow robes is a monk. This method of hypothetical inference is how we coordinate our reactions from general ideas. But are all these forms of action mechanical? Peirce has talked about habit formation under induction. In whatever manner the mind has reacted under a given sensation, in that manner it is more likely to react again, he writes. However, he argues against an absolute necessity. Were this inductive habit formation and subsequent reaction an absolute necessity, habits would become wooden and ineradicable, and no room being left for the formation of new habits, intellectual life would come to a speedy close. Thus, the uncertainty of the mental law is no mere defect of it, but is, on the contrary, its essence. While habits are formed based on general ideas, they are only tendencies, inclinations, increased probabilities to act in particular ways, but are not necessitated. The essence of life is spontaneity in its actions, without which it would be dead. To explain why inclinations could sometimes be disobeyed, psychologists of the necessitarian strain have come up with a law of fatigue, where the subject tires from the repetition and hence chooses another path. However, Peirce believes that to disregard the evidence of all the variety and apparent arbitrariness of mental action in favor of absolute determinism is a mistake. To think of ideas as atomic will be another mistake, that they cannot influence, resemble, or connect to another idea. Instead, we perceive that our instantaneous feelings flow together into a continuum of feelings and gain generality. These general ideas are, however, not infallible laws, but are living realities whereby living, Peirce means not determined, not mechanical. They have an influence on our actions, are in turn influenced by other feelings, but do not strictly determine our actions. Peirce relates the general ideas to our character. Personality is some kind of coordination or connection of ideas, he writes. We have ideas which connect to one another to form a general idea, which is a living feeling. Our character is not formed in an instant, but over time, where as we live, experiencing feelings and act, sometimes in accordance with how our general ideas incline us and sometimes contrary to them, self-consciously aware of these forces, our personality develops. This coordination and connection of ideas give us a direction, but this direction is not predetermined. It is a direction that develops as we live, what Peirce calls a developmental teleology. I think how Robert Cain views libertarian free will can aid Peirce's point. Kant proposes that there are moments in our lives where we freely make decisions that shape our character, what he calls self-forming actions, after which, when a similar situation arises, we act in accordance with our already formed character in a determined way. For instance, when Martin Luther said at the Diet of Worms, "Here I stand, I can do no other," it is not an endorsement of determinism. Kant believes that earlier on in Luther's life, he faced a decision where he chose to speak truth to power, even when it could hurt him. And from this self-forming action, his character took shape such that when he later had to face his enemies at the Diet of Worms, he already had a clear stance in mind. Hence Peirce writes, "A general idea, living and conscious now, it is already determinative of acts in the future." However, he rejects the notion that there is a predetermined objective or essence. Instead, what he believes is that we form our own objectives as we live. You may recognize the resonance with the existentialists. Were the ends of a person already explicit, there would be no room for development, for growth, for life, and consequently there would be no personality, he writes. He thinks that evolutionary philosophy, the principle of growth, is a primordial element of the universe. By primordial, this principle of growth applies not just to living things but also to non-living things. Matter is not completely dead, but is merely mind hidebound with habits, he writes. An idea can only be affected by another idea that finds connection with it. Non-living things are embodied ideas, which is how they can communicate with our ideas. How objects are able to give us sensations, which then excite in us feelings, Peirce thinks it has something to do with the ideas in the objects themselves. He recognizes that this theory that everything has a mind may seem extravagant, but the alternative of inexplicability is worse. As for communication between people, Peirce suggests that it is similar to how a person is conscious of himself. The idea of that second person, his personality, enters the consciousness of the first person and is recognized as an ego. At the same time, we recognize that the other person is not me and hence is external to me. Peirce realizes one difficulty with his notion of communication as ideas affecting ideas. He is a Christian and notes that if there is such a communication between things and beings, then the fact that some people can doubt the existence of a personal God, that some people may not experience such a direct communication, hence leading to their doubt, is mystifying. He does not know how this is possible, but can only say that sometimes facts can stare us in the face, and yet they may not be the most easily discerned, that we can doubt what is clear and distinct. In conclusion, ideas can only connect with other ideas. Things connect to us by being embodied ideas, which connects with our ideas, be it in the form of sensations or feelings. Ideas in our minds then connect with other ideas, spreading while losing power, and together, this group of connected ideas gain generality, becoming a habit which then directs our actions. These habits are only inclinations and do not dictate strictly how we act. The connection of ideas demonstrates Peirce's synechism. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.